Welcome to the latest episode of Sports Bazaar with me, Mick Malloy. Being joined as always, doing the heavy lifting, it's Titus O'Reilly.
Well, we're back after America's Cup.
We're not going to talk any America's Cup.
We're done on it.
I miss it already.
But we've talked about something where you definitely could die.
Okay,
today.
now, so just full disclosure, I have no idea what you're about to
You don't even
put
know
on
the topic
table.
this week.
I have no idea, so I'm very excited. I feel right now like you do at home listening. Here we go.
And me researching. Now, what we're going to talk about is at the moment, as this is going out, the Rugby World Cup is on in
Correct.
France.
It is.
And as we're recording this, Australia just lost to Fiji. Yeah. So you and I, our interest is low on it this year.
Yeah, it's not boding well.
It's not going well. No. So I thought what I'd do is I'd talk about, because one of the things, you've got 20 teams over there at the moment competing, and they're competing for the Webb Ellis Cup.
Yep.
So a lot of people might not, if you're not a rugby fan, that is the cup you win if you win the World Cup in rugby. So this is rugby union, not league, for anyone that's not across that. So it's named after, the Webb Ellis Cup is named after a guy named William Webb Ellis, and he is the man credited with inventing rugby. So he is the guy that invented
I like these origin
games.
stories. How did this occur? I'm going to. I'll have a.
You have
guess.
a crack, and then I'll fill you in.
Private school, England.
Yeah.
Between terms, board, get out, decide to chuck the pigskin round. Am I close?
You're very close, very close. So it's private school in Australia. They're called public
Australia,
school.
did we invent it?
No. They're called private schools in Australia. They're called public schools in America, UK.
Yeah.
And he was at a school as a 16-year-old in 1823. So just before yours and my time.
All the good stories you
They
tell
all-
come from 1800s. That seemed to be a very prolific time to be inventing games.
You and I are
stuff.
children of the 80s, 70s/80s, right? So we remember how little parents cared about their kids then.
Yeah.
You go back to 1823, well, the parents really did. They made the 80s parents look like
home by
helicopter.
Easter.
Yeah, they made the 80s parents look like helicopter parents.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
Oh, wow.
So he was 16, he was at school, and he was at the Rugby public school. So it was an
so
actual
there's a
school
school
called Rugby. So that's
Now I
where it's
feel
from.
silly.
And during they had a game of football that was occurred. This is the story of how it was invented.
Yeah.
They're playing this game, and he picked up the ball and ran with it. And this was illegal
When
at
he
the
wasn't supposed
time.
to.
Yeah,
Were they
it was
playing
actually
soccer
illegal.
or
It wasn't exactly like soccer. It was a variation where you could catch the ball, but then you had to put the ball on the ground and
What was he
kick it
thinking?
forward. He just caught the ball and ran into the end goal area and scored.
He's
right?
gone mad.
And the story is the teachers were so impressed by his creative thinking here that they actually changed the rules, and the sport of rugby union as it is now,
They
but
were
rugby at the
impressed.
time.
I would get detention.
You would
for
get
that.
detention,
I would
right?
get beaten up by the other kids.
Exactly. So that's the story. So this innovative student, as a 16-year-old, William Webb Ellis, picks up the ball,
Good on him.
scores, and invents this new style of football that becomes rugby. This is the story, and that is why, right to this day, the Webb Ellis Trophy in France is being celebrated. So that's our biggest story, origin story it is, and how important it is to rugby that they've named their number one trophy after it.
Fantastic.
Only problem is none of it's true.
What?
It's completely false.
Thank you. That was a great episode.
So
Why
anyway,
would you do that to me?
well, this is why the story of how rugby came around is way more interesting,
Oh.
how this became the myth, the origin story of rugby is interesting too.
Oh.
So we're going to unpack this, and you are going to love this because this has got shenanigans galore. So,
Yes.
earlier in the year, we covered medieval football and mob football,
We loved
remember? You know, and these were these big rolling malls of people.
They still do it.
500. They still do it in about 3 or 4 places in the UK. And they were played on Easter. Remember, it was Shrovetide,
Yes.
football. The whole town would play. If you were born on one side of the river, you played the people born on the other side of the river.
Do you know when you unpacked
All
that
that stuff,
story,
yeah.
I wasn't entirely convinced that the carnage was like you had described.
Yeah.
So I went.
Because there's no
and-
rules
and
except you
looked
can't
it up.
murder someone.
My God, it was like
Yeah.
it was a riot.
It's a riot with a ball in the
It's
middle.
a riot that ends in tears for
Yeah.
everyone involved.
Yeah. So back in this time, and you can go back and listen to that if you haven't heard that episode, but around that time, that towns would get together and play that once a year, right? And there were no rules, and it was like whoever could move the ball, and it was just a big rolling maul. So that was...
You go like 24 hours or something.
Yeah, and that's what... Someone would go 2 days in a row, like, you know, and it was like literally the only rule was don't kill anyone, right? So out of this, while that was happening, by the 19th century, so getting into the 1820s and around this time, the whole society of England... So there's no organised sport. That was the sport, right? Yeah. The rest of the sport was considered, if you said, I'm a sportsman, it meant you went fox hunting or shot things, basically. Shot stuff. There were no organised sport.
Is that a sport?
Well, they considered it a sport at the time.
Would you do an episode on the fox hunting? Surely there's enough funny stories there.
It probably would. I mean, we'd get
letters. Or just shooting, the English.
Well, the English, like, it was the way they banned or didn't ban certain sports, like fox hunting and others, like cockfighting. And all, like, you know, all this sort of stuff.
Demonstration sport.
I know you're a huge... They would ban it depending on whether the rich or the poor did it.
That's
so if
correct.
the poor did it, it would be banned. So cockfighting was banned. Yeah. But it wasn't because they cared about the animals back then. Yeah. They didn't care at all about the animals.
It was unruly.
It was because it was unruly and the poor... Yeah. But the aristocrats were like, well, going shooting a fox is noble. We put on these red coats.
I'll shoot anything.
So this is
like,
what
you know my favourite Prince Philip story?
Oh, this is a Melbourne Cup field.
But he went out. There's a near where he lives, or one of his estates. There was like a kindergarten, and all the kids are playing outdoors. And all of a sudden, out of the sky, were dropping these birds like bang, 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 and kids are screaming and running inside. And there's Prince Philip in a neighbouring field just shooting pheasant or geese or whatever it is he's shooting out of the sky, and they're just dropping
into the kindergarten.
Into a kindergarten. It's raining dead birds.
Those kids. He just lived his life. He didn't worry. He didn't care.
It's a good egg. All right.
So at the same time, so what's happening? That's the way it's always been. Medieval football, no organised sport, because most people are in the field working all summer. And then it's winter. They're not out. They don't have time to go and play organised sport or energy or interest. Their main sport was not starving to death.
Not being beaten.
Not being killed by a lord. Yeah. But by the 19th century, you've got the Industrial Revolution in full swing. You've got this middle class making a lot of money, who aren't the aristocracy, and they're starting to challenge the aristocracy.
And a bit of spare time on their hands.
They had spare time. And schools start to become more prevalent because up until this point, most rich people, aristocrats, they'd hire a tutor. So if you had kids, you'd have a tutor that would come and probably live with you, teach them French, teach them everything, and that was school. There wasn't an organised school. But these schools started to arrive, and they were called public schools. And they were called public because they were not privately owned. They were run by trustees in a local community. Now in England, that's why they were called public. They were really expensive. They become expensive.
Still for the gentry.
Well, they become that, and for the these rising middle classes who have a lot of money. Yeah. So these are schools like Eton, Charterhouse, Harrow, Westminster, Winchester, Shrewsbury, and another one in the Midlands is Rugby, and Rugby is a more upper middle class. It's not as... Eton is the upper class one to this day.
The Royals go.
Yeah, and half the prime ministers are from there and everything. Yeah. But these were non-local schools in that people boarded there. The students usually weren't from the area. They were sent there, and they were controlled by trustees.
English were good at that, weren't
they? They loved not having their kids around, right?
They nutted that one out.
Yeah. But what it means is suddenly got all these boys, and they're in this... away from home boarding. They're going
all boys schools?
All boys.
All
girls? Schools. Nah, girls were not. Yeah.
No education at all?
Not much at this point. Like, they start to spring up later. But the good old days. It's like the Taliban, but back in the... They didn't want the women... So these boys are sitting around. They've got a lot of spare time. These schools were very, in the early days, loosely run.
Yeah.
Right? So we've got this image of them being, really well organised, proper education, all these things. These were rough, often brutally violent. Kids left almost Lord of the Flies. There's maybe one teacher who was paid not very much, who didn't really care. So these
wasn't his passion to teach children.
Wasn't his passion. These were not seen as anyone with money, real money, wouldn't have sent their kids here. Right? We now have this image of them, but when they started, they were rough outs. Right?
When did all the monks and nuns turn up? When do they?
This is like because the Catholic Church has been kicked out of England. This is all run by the Anglicans, and
they're not.
It exists, but it's not as full on as the Catholic schools in Ireland and places like that. So all the working class people working 6 days a week, and that was like that till 1850 when there was a Factory Act. So it leaves these private school boys boarding, a lot of time on their hands, all hanging out together to invent games.
Sure.
So this brings us to Rugby School. Rugby School, it's in Warwickshire. It's 100 miles northwest of London in the Midlands. And it's founded in 1567. So it's very old. It was created because in the will of a guy called Lawrence Sheriff, he left in his will for a local school to educate local boys. And it was going to be free of charge to those local boys. So he was a good guy. Now, he had become rich and famous because he provided spices and groceries to Princess Elizabeth. She was living in exile at Hatfield House, and she goes on to become Queen Elizabeth I, arguably the greatest queen of all time in England.
Why was she in exile?
Well, because of
was it something to do with the Scottish?
It was the Mary Queen of Scots. Her father was Henry VIII. There was all this real succession fight. She ends up winning, but he, when it was very tenuous, looked after her. So when she becomes queen, she remembers who was loyal when things were not good.
Well played, sir.
So she gives him a coat of arms, does all this sort of stuff. She starts sending him gifts. He sends her gifts. She becomes very successful. And so when he dies, he draws up this will, and it says that we're going to start this school in the town of Rugby, and the school becomes known as Rugby, and that it's going to look after children in that area, and it's free education.
All right.
To give you an idea what these schools are like, and when it sort of became well known, there was a headmaster called, this is when it starts to get national attention for the first time, a guy called Henry Ingalls. He was the headmaster from 1794 to 1806. So this is, games are being played, but they're very disorganised. And Henry Ingalls is known for his discipline, and he's given the nickname by the students the Black Tiger because he was always miserable and mean.
It sounds so good.
Yeah.
Wow, this guy sounds great.
So in November 1797, Ingalls as headmaster of Rugby, he finds a student, Astley, who's in one of the boarding houses, firing cork bullets at the study windows of the housemaster. So it's kind of like a slingshot kind of thing, right?
Yeah. He's the Bart Simpson of his day.
Yeah, but it's actually got gunpowder. So he's using this little mechanism to fire these cork bullets at the window. And so the headmaster catches him, the
Black Tiger.
The Black Tiger, and says to this pupil, Astley, where did you get this? He said, where did you get the gunpowder from? He said, I got it from a shopkeeper in town called Rowell. So the headmaster goes in and says, you're selling gunpowder to my students, and Rowell, the shopkeeper, goes, I am not, and shows him his order book and says, look, there's no sales to your student. He's lying. Now, there's suspicion that he had, as if he's going to write down, I'm selling gunpowder to students. But so Ingalls says, oh, okay. It takes the shopkeeper's word over Astley, the student, and has him flogged.
That's a typical dispute from the early 1800s.
Yeah. And
Are you selling
gunpowder to my students? So he has the boy Astley flogged for lying.
Okay.
Right? Astley goes back to the boarding house and tells everyone that he's been flogged. They knew, and tells them the reason why. So his friends that night go out and smash all the windows of Rowell's shop.
Okay.
Right?
Oh, we've got a feud now.
So Ingalls, the headmaster, hears of the vandalism. And so he confronts all the boys and says, all the members of the 5th and 6th form will pay for the damage. I don't know who did it, so you're all paying.
Right.
The boys decide that the best way forward is to launch in a rebellion.
I just love this story. No one's lying down in this one. No.
Because these are kids of the...
A rebellion, you say?
Yeah, these kids see tutors who they usually have at home and they've been sent to these schools, they see them as beneath their station. It's not like today where there's this sort of respect for the tutor. These are boys that have grown up fairly well off, and they see the tutor as like the hired help, and he's suddenly punishing them. And that is not the tradition in any of these schools. So they seem as socially inferior.
So what form does the rebellion take?
Well, that Friday after this has all happened, at the end of the week, after the fourth lesson of the day, the boys place a homemade bomb against a school door and blow it off its hinges. Is it just a bit of a warning shot across the bow?
Where are they getting the gunpowder?
Exactly. There seems to be no shortage of getting gunpowder, right? The following day on the Saturday, it's a half day of school, right? So the bell rings at the end of the lessons, and the boys got the rest of the day off. And most of the masters or the teachers go home for the day, all right? So the boys use that school bell when it rings as a signal to launch the next stage, the rebellion. So they go down to most of the teachers gone, they go down to the main building, they break all the windows of the school.
Yep.
They get all the school's furniture, including the panelling within the school, and they throw it onto the large main field in front of the school, and they set it all alight. So it's a huge bonfire. Huge bonfire. They also added Ingalls, the headmaster's books to it. Billy plus the school butler.
Yeah.
So they've got a school butler. He rescues some of the more expensive books from the fire. He's trying to tell them off, but they're out of control. There's a passage from the schoolhouse to one of the boarding houses and the main school building. So the boys nail that shut to stop Ingalls, who lived in the boarding house, being able to get out and get into the school. So they nail him into...
The Black Tiger's going to be furious.
He's furious. So they nail him into... he's trapped.
And then set it on fire?
Yeah, he's a prisoner, basically, in the school. There's a bonfire of all the furniture of the school happening on the
boys are
oval.
winning this.
The boys then... retreat to what is known as part of the grounds as the Island. It's a Bronze Age burial mound that's surrounded by a water moat up to 6 feet deep, and it's about 10 metres wide, so 20 to 30 feet wide. So it's literally like a moat.
It's a moat.
It's got a drawbridge, and they pulled the drawbridge up. So now the boys, after breaking most of the school and set on fire,
Inaccessible.
sitting on this island.
Well done, boys.
Ingalls sends messages out to the other teachers saying, "You got to get back here." But they're too far away. 2 are fishing in the River Avon and another is out shooting rabbits, so they can't find them. So he then sends a message to Mr. Butlin, who's a local banker and he's the town's justice of the peace. And it's market day in Rugby, so Butlin asks the horse dealers with their long whips to come and assist.
This is escalating.
He also finds an army recruitment party that's headed by a sergeant and asks them to come. So they, with all their guns, fix bayonets.
Oh, boy.
And head down to the school to sort this all out. So you've got guys with whips and soldiers with bayonets showing up, right?
It's like muck-up day.
Yeah. They approach it. Butlin, the special constable of the police, he distracts the boys by literally reading them the Riot Act. So in England, you had to basically read out an act of parliament that's where reading the Riot Act comes from. Yeah, they would read it out, and then that meant once you read it out, if you didn't stop, they could just basically do whatever they wanted.
Beat you to death with batons.
Yeah. While he's reading this out, the boys are all watching him. The soldiers circle around behind them and cross the moat on the opposite side and take them prisoner at bayonet point. So the students are all captured. Ingalls had locked himself in. He was locked in this house, so he came out and he immediately expelled the ringleaders and had many of the others flogged. Right? The parents are furious and he gets sacked.
This is shaping up beautifully.
In 1828, after all this has been going down, all these schools, all the English public schools have got terrible. They're not like Eton now is like you want to send your kids there, blah, blah, blah. You know, it's the way the rich. At this point, no one with money would send a kid to a public school. It's if you can't afford a tutor, that's where you send your kid, or you don't want them around. Yeah. And they're horrible places, and they're terrible, and their education outcomes are horrendous. Right, you're not going to end up smart. In 1828, a new headmaster arrives at Rugby, and his name is Thomas Arnold, and he goes on to revolutionise not only the school, but he sets up a whole new model for the English public school. Completely revolutionary. The reason is he'd gone to Winchester College, and he knew how brutal these schools were. Right. On his first night at Winchester, this is Arnold when he was a boy, he knelt down next to his bed when they were all going to sleep to pray, and all the other boys decided that this was silly and beat the living daylights out of him. So this is the sort of places they are. So he realised that he hated the way the schools were run, and so he decided, I'm going to change it as headmaster. So he reduces the systemic cruelty. He makes the pupils very busy. So he realises these riots and revolts and all this, they're not busy enough. So he puts in this huge curriculum of Latin and Greek, and so all the classics that the English now talk about that the upper class all
to stop them burning
follow.
the joint to the ground.
Yeah, he makes you have to learn Latin, you have to learn Greek, you have to study, the Romans, you have to.
So it wasn't the pursuit of knowledge; it was to stop them incinerating the building.
He brings this all in. It's not practical learning. Like it's not like learning how to do bookkeeping or something. It's like
I told you Latin was pointless.
But he's the guy that starts
filling
it all.
in time. It's filler.
It is, because they're all... So he decides that he also revamps the prefix system. So the prefix who were previously leading revolts and rebellions, he gets them to basically be the heads of the school and come and have dinner with him.
That's a smart move.
Yeah, he gets them to show leadership.
He gets the ringleaders.
To become your leaders of the school, and you've got power. Your job is to keep the boys in order.
Wield it in their direction.
Yeah, and also this is the 1820s. He doesn't care if they beat them up if you have to, but you're in charge. Totally. You can't get in trouble, basically. I'm expecting you to put discipline into the boys, right? So he does all of that. He wasn't that into sport, but he suddenly realised, look, sport's a good way to keep these guys busy.
Yeah.
Because he realised that a lot of them were fighting with local boys or poaching and doing all these dodgy things. He said, if they're playing sport a lot, it'll burn off all this energy.
I know exactly what... I've got 11-year-old boys, twin boys, and you've got to run them into the ground.
Yeah, otherwise you're cooked. So his period as headmaster is this revolution for not just rugby. Suddenly everyone wants to send their kids to rugby, and he becomes this huge figure. There's a book published in 1857 called Tom Brown's School Days. This is a famous book. Harry Potter is based on it. All these, or every St. Trinian's, all these books set in public schools are based on Tom Brown's School Days. It was the biggest novel of its time. Everyone read it.
Well, I'm going to go read it.
It was all about this. Arnold was a character in it because it was written by a former student at rugby. It has a whole chapter on the game of rugby in it. And it's all about muscular Christianity. It's about raising boys to be good Christians, but tough, right? Perfect for the new British Empire.
Make a movie about this with the salty old guy.
There's thousands of movies. Stephen Fry played Arnold in the most recent version. So, there's about 5. So, Tom Brown's School Days is everything. Harry Potter, with all the houses and the way it's all run, is just a magical version of this book. This book is what created all of that kind of stories, right? And... So it became, this book also laid out rugby as a game. So suddenly you've got rugby is...
First recorded word of rugby? Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's the first sort of written down one, but it's suddenly, because everyone's reading this book in England and in the Empire, suddenly everyone's heard of rugby school and they've heard of this sport of rugby that is played in the thing. There's this interest in it. So much so that Baron de Coubertin, who we know created the Olympics, visited rugby. It was after Arnold had died, but when he went to Arnold's tomb, which is in the school chapel at Rugby, he said he was looking at the very cornerstone of the British Empire, and he said that he was the founder of athletic chivalry, and this is what he was going to base the Olympic Games on. So rugby has gone from being this school that no one knows, it's known for rioting, to... This is this new... All the other schools start copying the style of you don't treat the boys as badly. You teach them classics, but you get them into organised sport. And we'll start treating it. So this was how big it is. It became a huge thing.
Did that become the model?
That became the model everywhere, right, for these rich schools. So while this rugby game has been played in some form or other for... possibly 100 years before, 200 years before, but never written down and always changing. No one took much interest in it. Arnold passes away, and suddenly people start getting interested in actually writing down the rules of this game. And so in 1845, the rugby rules are written down.
Yep.
And it's the first time ever, like, basically a sport's been codified, the rules have been written down. It's never happened before. So football is it's done at rugby at the school. So soccer hasn't been invented yet. No other sports have written down rules. Rugby is
no
the first
organised ball sport.
No. And so this is the first time. So writing down the rules is kind of a powerful thing because suddenly you can pass the rules around to people and say, this is the game we play, right? So this is the first time in sport that we're moving out of that mob football or disorganised game that students just make up to an actual written...
A game with a constitution.
Yeah. So 3 pupils write this down, and it's not really a full proper list of rules because it assumes you know how the game plays. It more clarifies bits of it. It's for people that are at rugby school. It's for students that are at rugby school. So there's a lot of reference to things like certain trees that you have to avoid. You know, it mentions the island that they were writing on. A lot of the rules are about how it's illegal to forge sick notes to get out of playing. Because the whole school has to play. It's only in case of extreme emergency should anyone be permitted to leave the close till the game is finished. That's one of the rules, right? So it's written up. So in 1845, we suddenly have these set rules. Now, the rules don't refer to rugby as we know it now, right? There's no reference to whether you can pick up and run with the ball or not.
We're not there yet.
We're not there yet. There is one that says you can run in a goal, which means you can run into the end, which suggests you can pick up the ball. And so this is sent through. There's 37 rules, but you wouldn't recognise it. And you and I reading it wouldn't understand it because it's very in place. So the boys at Eton College hear of this and they see themselves as the aristocrats and they see rugby, which is funny because rugby is now seen as a very upper class sport. They see rugby as like this middle class hopeless school. And there's a rivalry. And so they write down their rules 2 years later in 1847. They have 2 games, one called the field game and one called the wall game. And the field game they write down. And the field game that they believe is superior has a set of rules that is almost the complete opposite of rugby. So rugby seems to be, at this point, it's very barbaric still. You can charge, tackle people, you can kick them in the shins, you can do all sorts of things. The Eton boys look at it as mainly kicking and very little handling, so very little touching of the ball. You catch the ball, but then you put it on the ground and then kick it forward. That's how they play.
Pardon me, Your Majesty.
Yeah, exactly. And they see it like all of this. They see dribbling with the ball on the ground as more important. So you're starting to get these 2 very different, with Eton boys having one version and then you've got the rugby having the other. The other public schools all start to write down all their rules. So by 1855, Shrewsbury's done theirs. A few years later, Harrow do it, then Westminster and Charterhouse. So there's about 15 different public school written down games, and they're all fairly different. So everyone's like, there's not a set rules. And this isn't really a problem, except these boys all go to Cambridge and Oxford. So they all go there. And they all suddenly want to play together, but it's like no one speaks the same language.
Yeah, that's right.
So fist fights start breaking out whenever you try and organise a game of football, right? Because the Eton boys want to not pick up the ball and the rugby guys...
What are you doing?
Yeah, they're all through. So it said the result was dire confusion, said one student who was there. Every man played the rules he'd been accustomed to at public school. I remember how the Eton men howled at the rugby men for handling the ball. So this was this huge, issue at the time. So a former Shrewsbury pupil, another public school, Edgar Montague, he went about setting up in 1840 a game at Cambridge that he tried to use all the different rules and come up with like a universal set of rules, right? And this is how like a lot of other sports, Australian rules football is an attempt to bring all these different publics, because this is happening at the same time in Australia.
Correct.
They've got all the different rules, and they're trying to figure out what the game should be and come up with a hybrid set. Because it's not that there's no rules now; there's too many rules, and no one can agree. Yep. So, a few years later, a few other guys sit down, and in 1848, they draw up a bunch of rules, and it's by a bunch of people from different ones, and they come up with a set of rules called the Cambridge Rules. This is in 1848. There's no record of these. Our knowledge comes from another letter referring to them later on. But basically, they're printed as the Cambridge Rules. They're sent out and distributed in Cambridge. at the university, and people seem to not mind them. These are the rules that Cambridge start to play with, which is
incorporated a bit of everything.
A bit of everyone.
It's a compromise kind of.
It's a compromise
game kind of.
Yeah, so you can. There's a bit of running with the ball. There's a lot of kicking. There's all these sort of things. Yeah, it's done by people that come up with it. Students from Rugby, Eton College, Harrow, Marlborough, Westminster and Shrewsbury. So it's a mismatch. But these Cambridge rules suddenly are here and seen as quite important. When you see what they are, they're basically, if you were watching this sport, to our eyes it would look strange, but it would basically a bit of a cross between soccer and Australian rules football. So you could mark a ball, and then you'd get a free kick, so much like Australian rules. But then you would have to put the ball on the ground and kick it. There was a tight offside rule, so you couldn't run anywhere. So there was all different sort of rules, but it was a bit like Australian rules and soccer. Soccer still hasn't been invented? No. So you've got all these young guys, uni students, arguing massively over these games they played. Yeah. The rest of the world is like, we're a bit busy for this. We're fighting wars and all this sort of stuff, right? So this has just been played out by rich private school and university kids, right, at this point. So around the 1840s, though, you suddenly have all this rapid expansion of railways in Britain. So you've got 442 railway-related acts passed by Parliament, and you've got more than 2,000 miles of track being laid. So it's suddenly you can get around easier. And so suddenly
people aren't as isolated as they used to be.
Yeah, so people are moving around. And so all these public school boys have either gone to uni or they've left public school, and they're now starting to move around the country. And wherever they go, they start to set up. They want to play the game they played whenever they. So it might be the Cambridge rules, it might be the Harrow rules, it might be the rugby rules. It's it's just wherever they happen to go, right? So it means basically it's spreading, and there's this thing that gets referred to at the time as the games cult. So it's seen as a cult, which is this ideology that comes up that football and other games weren't just a substitute for undesirable activities. So it's no longer just to stop rioting. Yeah. That it is incredibly important because it teaches loyalty, self-sacrifice, unselfishness, cooperation, the spirit de corps,
team play,
all that sort of stuff. Being a good loser, sucking it up, all this. Yeah. These are seen by the British as suddenly this is what we need for, our country and our empire. We want people like this. Yeah. That tough, hard, don't complain, get on with it. Still chivalrous, all that sort of stuff, right? There's two big schools of debate around all these games. So all these games are being built up, and there starts to be, well, how can we have one set of rules so we could all play each other? Becomes like it did happen at Cambridge. This starts to happen across the whole country. How do we all want to play each other. Yeah. We're all created football clubs. But often we can't play anyone.
What are the terms?
Yeah, what are the terms?
It's like when Australian rules football plays Irish Gaelic football. Yeah,
and a hybrid's created.
And you have to go, all right, these are the rules.
Exactly.
We'll stop doing this.
Yeah.
This is worth 2 points.
Yeah, we'll give up this part of it. So they're doing that, but it's often worked out often the day before they play. So it's not like you can even train for it. It's like it's almost negotiated every time you have to play new set of rules. Yeah. So the newspapers, they start to write, in the newspapers, they start to be all these letters coming in going, here's my suggestion for a set of rules, and we desperately need one. It becomes this big debate.
Yes.
And a lot of it is, there was a letter in 1861 to The Field, which is the country gentleman's newspaper. I know you're a subscriber to this day.
Oh, I love it.
And it had somewhat, what happens when a game of football is proposed at Christmas amongst a party of young men assembled from different schools? The Eton man is enamoured by his own rules and turns up his nose at rugby as not sufficiently aristocratic, while the rugbyian retorts that bullying and sneaking are not to his taste and that he is not afraid of his shins or of a maul or a scrimmage. So basically what's happening is there's these deep amongst the... You could put all of them.
Parochial.
There's rugby and Eton and so Eton and the Cambridge rules and a bunch of other schools are on one side, which is this skill, not handling the ball kind of approach.
That's heading towards soccer, right?
That's heading towards soccer. And then you've got rugby's rules and a few other schools that are similar to rugby's rules that are much more like tackling, running with the ball, all this. And the two are trying to agree. They're not necessarily opposed. They could have merged, right? And they're trying to work it out. And, so Eton, Shrewsbury, Harrow, they're sort of on one side. There's another group, Westminster and Charterhouse. They have a game that doesn't have much handling but has less of an offside rule. So it's not like rugby's offside rule where you've got to be behind the ball. Yes. You can pass the ball forward, which is a bit like soccer.
Yep.
So the Eton and those ones kind of join with the Westminster and Charterhouse in this non-handling game, and you got rugby on the other side, right? They still had this desire to try and reunite these two types of styles and into one that everyone agrees on. But there was one problem, aside from the handling and running with the ball or not touching the ball. There was another argument that really divided people, and this was called hacking, right? So hacking became probably the bigger issue than whether you could pick up the ball and run with it or not. Because even these Eton games, what becomes soccer, you could still catch the ball. Remember, you just have to then put it on the ground. So it wasn't full no hands at this point. Yeah. They both agreed that you can catch the ball. It was whether you could then run with the ball or not, and whether if you run with the ball, therefore you need to be able to tackle. Because otherwise, it's just someone just runs in, right? Yeah. So hacking was one of the main features of the rugby game. It's mentioned 4 times in the 1845 regulations, right? It's a tactic that involves basically, it's 2 different types. One is tripping an opposing player by kicking them in the shins.
Yes.
That was one. And the other is kicking people in the shins when the ball's in a maul or ruck. Gotcha. It's all kicking in the shins. Yeah. Hacking means kicking in the shins, right?
None of that.
You're allowed to do it below the knee and above the ankle. So you can't stamp on their foot. You can't kick them in the nuts or something, or their head, but you can kick their shins as much as you want, right? And so they had lots of rules over it. Now, the Eton Field games basically ban it. They don't have it. Yeah. So they don't like it. So hacking is known as, a lot of it is, they say if you're really good at hacking, and that means when someone's got the ball and is running with it, instead of trying to tackle them, you just kick them in the shin. And if you're good at it, it says you can bring them down on their face like you'd shot a rabbit. So they
nice hack.
Yeah, so they became very good at this. And it was also used before referees were introduced to make sure people, if anyone went offside, you punish them by kicking them in the shins, right? So this was quite needed in rugby because you often needed to get the ball out of a huge scrum. So kicking everyone in the shins was a good way of moving them on, right? So it was seen as a good thing. This gets movement of the ball, right? And at this time, sometimes you have 150 people playing at once, not 15 aside, right? So that was all seen as big, innocent fun at rugby. Like there was no idea that this was brutal. So there was someone who wrote there was a guy called W.H.D. Rouse, and he wrote a history of rugby school. And he said, these scrummages provide an excellent opportunity for boys to pay off old scores. They would join forces in a deliberate attack on an unpopular rival.
Oh, they're premeditated.
Premeditated. I got to kick the shit out of this guy. This practice had the effect of curbing the worst excesses of any bullying or overweening despotic senior boys. Such attacks could be barbarous, and it was hacking employed by this purpose which got banned by the headmaster at one point, right? So this was like they would settle scores by it, and the headmasters often saw this as, well,
let it go.
Like in ice hockey.
They'll sort it out.
If you want to do the wrong thing, someone will fight you, and it will sort itself. It will
what have we learned here today?
Exactly. What have we learned today? So this was, you could do it. One of the rules was you couldn't hold someone get someone else to hold someone while you hack them.
Yeah.
So that was frowned upon. You couldn't grab someone and just start hacking them. But they would just go, occasionally the players would all ask for a break. There's no ref, but to each other.
Let's all agree.
Just to hack.
Like a truce.
No.
Just to hack.
Stop the game.
Stop the game.
Just so
let's hack.
Let's all hack each other's and just hack away at each other's shins. So
they would stop the game known as rugby?
Yeah.
Wow.
So this is what they would do, and it was bad form to back off from
I can see Eden's point.
Yeah. It was considered bad form to back off from a challenge to be hacked. So so I might kick you in the shins, you kick me in the shins, and we go until one of us can't do it anymore, and it was a way of settling a score. and it was seen as bad form to either back off or blub to the teachers.
Yeah, this is like a prison philosophy.
Yeah.
Kind of stuff.
It was totally like so. Even though these schools were better than they had been, this was seen as you need to do this right. You got to be tough. And there's no complaining. And this is why these guys like pretty brutalised a lot of them, right? Yeah. Like these guys go on to become governor generals of colonies and stuff and lead armies, right? After one match, the forwards from the losing sides were said to have been so badly injured that their headmaster sat down on the grass and wept like a child. This was written up in the it was written up in the official history by Rouse about this guy crying after a match because it was so brutal. And he said of the headmaster, not to make too much of the headmaster crying, because for the gentleman in question evidently had a gift of tears and used to weep over a Greek play in form. So they just had no sympathy. No sympathy, right?
Yeah, just get on with it.
Another time, one of the boys there tried to take some of the injured players after a game into the schoolhouse to be treated. And the schoolhouse butler looked at them at the front door, and they're all like, being kicked, their broken shins, everything. And he said it was weakness if they were going to come in and be treated, and said to them, let them bury their own dead.
Get back out there, you lot. This is incredible.
So this is what it was like. It was like, they just didn't. There was a headmaster, Dr. Frederick Temple, and he came along. He later was the Archbishop of Canterbury. And he was asked by a visitor who was watching one of the games of the boys, said, have you ever stopped a match? And Temple replied, never short of manslaughter. But even Temple started to go, I think it's getting a bit far. Yeah. And started to say to the rugby boys, you need to calm down. Now, but he became very unpopular because it was always seen as the boys made up the rules. Teachers were not involved.
Stay out. None of your business.
But at this point, what was happening is, while rugby, the school had always been the host of and the centre of all the rules, at this point there was all these, because students now were old enough that they'd gone out into the world, they'd gone to Cambridge, they'd gone to Oxford, and now they were out setting up their own clubs. These clubs might have used the rugby rules, but weren't run by the rugby school, and so they were starting to evolve into their own form. So rugby, the school, started to have rules that were out of touch with the broader thing.
Yep.
So the 1845 rules, as we know, they were very incomplete, and they presumed you knew about the game.
Yep.
So one of the rugby's, the maths tutor, Francis Elliott Kitchener, arranged for the students to sit down in 1862 and write a better set of rules that even if you had never been to rugby, or you could understand them. So it was a proper set of rules. And he wrote these all down and had all the things in how you could play it from whatever. And these were sent out everywhere. So suddenly you had clubs following these rules in Liverpool, Manchester, Sale, all these places. And it's spreading to all these other public schools, right? So this leads to a massive problem for all the other Eton sports and all this, because suddenly there is a set of rules that exists from rugby school that very clearly lays out how to play a game from scratch, easily disseminated, easily go out to everyone. And it has in it hacking, and it has in it handling the ball.
Sure.
This leads to a national call that we need to set up a new set of rules that everyone can play and everyone can agree on. The people that, both the Eton side and the rugby side, how can we all come together outside of the school system and create a new set of rules? And so we might leave it here, but in 1863, a group of men get together at the Freemason Tavern in London, and they sit down to form something called the Football Association that exists to this day as the FA, the FA Cup. And they sit down to work out a set of rules that makes both rugby and the emerging game of soccer please everyone. And in the next episode, we'll see how well that goes.
I knew none of that. And that is awesome. I love the development and birth of anything we now take for granted.
Yeah.
But what a difficult birth.
Let's go and have a hack with each other.
Well, I'm going to hack you to death. And if you go to the principal, I will.
I promise I won't tell, and I won't even seek medical treatment.
Well done. Well, I can't wait for the next instalment. Thank you once again, Titus O'Reilly.